grapes. Anybody?
I've seen the wild grapevines that grow here, but
Okay, one at a time.
I don't know why.
Speak into the microphone.
Well, I've seen wild grapevines here, but I don't think that's the reason why. It is. Okay, it is.
Okay, well, see, we've learned something already. Wild grape. Does anybody make wine in that area?
Yes. There's one right behind my house.
Interesting. Well, I have to say I don't think of Texas and wine going together, but maybe I have to change my perceptions. We always have to shake up the way we think about things when we learn something. Well, let me tell you a little bit about myself first. My name is Kenneth Davis. Most people call me Ken Davis. And I was born in 1954, which seems like 1,000 years ago to you guys, I'm sure, but not that long ago to me, in Mount Vernon, New York. Now, why is the name Mount Vernon important in American history, anybody? Yes, raising your hand there.
Wasn't it like where George Washington lived?
That's correct. It's George Washington's home. It was a home that belonged to his older half-brother, who named it Mount Vernon in honor of a British admiral that he had served with. So my town was actually named after Mount Vernon in honor of George Washington. So I guess maybe that's one of the reasons I had a connection to history in the very beginning. But the real reason I got interested in history from a very early age, and I've always been interested in history, was my parents always took us to places on vacation. We'd go camping. And we'd go camping to places like Valley Forge or Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York or Gettysburg. And it was in those places that I really got the sense that history is something that happens to real people in real places. It's not just something that happens in books, not just a long list of dates and battles and speeches. Before I go on, I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me okay and that there are no technical problems. Thumbs up. Good. I like the thumbs up look. I'm going to disappear for 1 second. No. I have two props and I forgot to bring them with me. But a lot of people ask me how long I've been writing about history, and I have the real answer. This is a book that I wrote when I was 9 years old, and I just found it. I don't know if you can see it very well. You can see why I became a writer and not an artist. But it's called My Project About Presidents, and I wrote this when I was in 3rd grade. And I guess I've been thinking about this stuff for a very long time. I was around that time, I was 9 years old. That was the year that I went to visit Gettysburg. And I still have on my desk, this is my souvenir from Gettysburg from 1963 when I was 9 years old. That was the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, which took place in July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in 1863. And so I got this, and it's just a little wooden carved revolver. But I keep it on my desk because it really reminds me, even today, of that feeling that I had when I was just 9 years old and I stood in this field, this wheat field in the middle of Pennsylvania in the summertime and felt the heat. But really that something very, very special and extraordinary had happened in this place. And so that's the kind of feeling I try and bring to my books, that history is an extraordinary story of real people. And when we read it that way and hear it that way, it becomes a lot more interesting. And that's what I've tried to do in my books. Don't Know Much About History was my very first book. It came out about 20 years ago. This is what it looks like now. It's just been issued in a new edition. I wrote about 8 books for adults, all under the Don't Know Much About name. Don't Know Much About History was the first, then Don't Know Much About Geography, another subject that Americans are very not so good in. And then Don't Know Much About the Civil War, because I thought that event was so important in our history it deserved to be treated in a separate book. Then I went on to write the books about mythology, the universe, and the Bible. Don't Know Much About the Bible. All of my books are written in a very, very different way from most school books. These are not school books, they're not textbooks. I write in a question and answer format, and I like to ask sometimes very simple questions like, what is manifest destiny, or what is the Monroe Doctrine? But sometimes I like to ask offbeat and quirky questions like, why is there a statue of Benedict Arnold's boot? And those kind of questions always perk up my curiosity, and I hope they perk up the reader's curiosity. So my books are really more, I think, like having a conversation back and forth. In a little while, I'm going to ask you to ask me some questions, and we'll have that conversation. What I wanted to talk to you about today, just a little bit, was we're obviously getting ready. Have you heard that the presidential election is coming?
Yes!
Has this caught your attention yet
Yes.
there in Texas? I wonder why in Texas it's gotten more attention maybe than somewhere else, but we can come back to that. I am writing a book about the presidents right now. I'm not the illustrated one that I wrote, but don't know about the American presidents. And one of the things I've been doing is spending a lot of time doing research on why the founding fathers and the framers of the Constitution made up the president. You know, if we think about it, and the president is there, we see him on television, we see all the pictures of presidents going back over 200 years. But when those men got together in Philadelphia in 1787, in the very same building where 11 years before they had drafted the Declaration of Independence and adopted it, when they got together, they were inventing something completely new. There was no president. There had been presidents in Congress, the Congress that existed then, but there was no Constitution, there was no president, there was no House of Representatives and Senate. They were inventing all these things. So how did they come up with this? Why 4 years? Why make a president elected by something called electors? Why not have the people elect him? All of these questions were very important to them, and they really fought and argued about them. This wasn't a bunch of guys sitting around having coffee and a casual conversation. They had some very, very heated debates. And when I say heated, I mean it, because they were inside a building and they had to lock the doors and shut the windows, and it was hot in Philadelphia in the summertime because they didn't want anyone to listen. They didn't want people to stand outside the windows and hear what they were saying, because they were making decisions that were going to affect America for a very, very long time. And so they were afraid of secrets getting out, and this was all being done in secret. Not something that we would really appreciate today. You know, if we sometimes Congress goes into special sessions where we don't hear what they say, but for the most part, we Americans are very lucky. We get to know what these people are saying all the time. Back in 1787, that was not the case. So the first thing they decided was that the president should be one man, not 3 people, or a council, or a committee. That was a pretty important decision. The next thing they decided was that he should be elected not by the legislature, which is kind of how they do it in England today, where the parliament picks the prime minister, and it's usually the head of the one party or the other. But they wanted the people to elect him, but there were problems with that. This is 1787. You couldn't turn on Facebook and get President Obama's tweets, or you couldn't, go on Twitter and find out what, a candidate is doing, or turn on the TV or cable news, and you certainly couldn't pick up a newspaper in a lot of places. People had no idea in 1787, if you lived in Massachusetts, who somebody in Georgia was. So they were very worried about this idea. How can we have people in one part of the country know and elect somebody from another part of the country? So there were real practical problems. So they came up with this idea. Each state would choose how they were going to choose these electors. And today we call it the Electoral College, and it's not a party school. Today we have these electors, and each state chooses how those electors are picked. Most states now go based on a popular vote. And of course, the popular vote is usually the same as the electoral vote, but not always. And that's where we get into some difficulties, like we had back in 2000. You are guys probably too young to remember that, but for a couple of weeks, the nation was really